Hi everyone and welcome to another Psych student video. Today, following on from our previous video on the frontal lobe testing, we're looking at how you test the specific functions of the temporal lobe. This again is something that's really useful for OSCEs and CASC exams in particular. So with my questionable drawing here, we can start to think about the temporal lobe specifically and what sort of functions this does and how these might be interrupted and therefore tested. So the temporal lobe is involved in lots of different things, but particularly in reading and writing, learning and naming, as well as kind of memory functions, fitting again in with frontotemporal dementias alongside other difficulties. Much like with the frontal lobe, there's lots of different ways in which function can be interrupted through illness or injury. For example, vascular changes, seizures can alter temporal lobe function, and space occupying lesions or tumours, but there are lots of different ways that this can be interrupted. When we think about the symptoms you could ask about, again, we think about specific functions of the temporal lobe, but also about ruling out functions and problems that could come from serious or kind of sinister causes. So looking for why it's dysfunctional in the first place. So symptoms you might think about are behavioural change, agitation or aggression. You might look at changes in vision, as the visual fields can be interrupted when there's temporal lobe problems. Depersonalisation or hallucinations, particularly in cases of, for example, temporal lobe epilepsy. And then further to that, you can look for changes in other types of epilepsies, or if there's other kind of seizure functions or changes. And sexual function as well can be part of the temporal lobe assessment. As I say, you need to screen for any red flags of any kind of sinister problems, so again looking for cardiovascular problems or tumour symptoms. So when we test the actual functions of the temporal lobe, we split this into the dominant lobe and non-dominant lobe, as they have quite different functions, although there are some overlaps. So for the dominant lobe, we look at receptive dysphasia, so alexia as in kind of reading, or agraphia as in writing, and asking them to therefore demonstrate this by reading something or writing something. We then look at learning, so is there any impairment in learning and retention of verbal material for the dominant lobe? So this is what we're testing when we ask people to repeat an address. So we'd give them a new address, for example, 42 West Register Street, and then we ask them to recall the full address after 5 minutes. On the non-dominant lobe side, we look for visuospatial difficulties, so anomia, so asking them to name objects and if they're able to do that, prosopagnosia, so recognition of faces, or belief that a limb is absent or in some way missing. On the non-dominant lobe, there's also changes in non-verbal learning as opposed to kind of verbal memory from before. So here we ask them to retain non-verbal material, for example, showing them a picture and asking them to copy the drawing from memory a few minutes later. Bilaterally, you'd look at amnesic syndrome such as Korsakoff's and looking at assessing short and long-term memory. Thank you for your attention. I hope you enjoyed the video.